Welcome. We're so grateful that you've chosen to study with us this day as we continue our journeys through Acts. And we hope that you are profiting by it, as the profit from the Word is that accrues to those that look and meditate, pray about the things that they received. In our last session that we had, we discussed the matter of the death of Jesus Christ, that it was according to the matter of God's determinate counsel and foreordination. God knew it, and God ordained that the death of Christ is that should occur. And as we look, we find that just as Christ's death was that according to his determinate counsel, that he knew it, the Bible teaches likewise that his resurrection was something that was also known by God and something that God decreed. When we look at the resurrection of Jesus, then, we're going to be looking and studying today concerning David's prophecy about the resurrection of the Christ that was to come many centuries after David had lived and David had died. When Jesus began his public ministry, as we noted in our last study, there were those that came to him after he had begun in Jerusalem by cleansing the temple. And these that were ones that approached him were become his adversaries. And they asked him, since you do these things, what kind of sign do you give us that you have authority to do the things you do? So Jesus gave them a sign, and that sign was this: destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. They didn't understand at first, and yet while they thought that Jesus was talking about the literal temple, he was not. He was talking about the temple of his body. And the Apostle John, who wrote this gospel of Christ, made quite clear that he was speaking about his resurrection. But as we look, that was Jesus' sign to his nation. When the apostle has spoken then, having said that Jesus was delivered up by the determinate counsel and foreknowledge of God, he said that whom God raised up, having loosed the pangs of death, because it was not possible that he should be holden of it. And then Peter, speaking here in Acts the 2nd chapter, said that David said concerning him, I beheld the Lord always before my face, for he's on my right hand, that I should not be moved. Therefore my heart was glad, my tongue rejoiced. Moreover my flesh shall dwell also in hope, because thou wilt not leave my soul in hell, neither wilt thou give thy Holy One to see corruption. Thou madest known to me the ways of life. Thou shalt make me full of gladness with thy countenance. And then the apostle, speaking of that, said, Brethren, I may speak unto you freely of the patriarch David. He both died and was buried, and his tomb is with us to this day, being therefore a prophet, and knowing that God had sworn with an oath to him that of the fruit of his loins he would raise one up to sit upon his throne, he foreseeing this spake before of the resurrection of Christ, that neither was his soul left unto Hades, nor did his flesh see corruption. We find that David speaks concerning one that was to come. And as he speaks of that one that was to come, we find that he said, I will not leave my soul in Hades, neither will thou give thy Holy One to see corruption. Because it is that David used the terms and the pronouns as though it were personal to him. The Apostle Peter clarifies that. He said, I may speak unto you freely of the patriarch David. He both died. He was buried. His tomb is with us to this day. What the apostle is saying simply is this: David could not have been speaking of himself. For in David's prophecy, he said that what the Lord was not going to do was leave his soul in Hades. And what the Lord was not going to do was to allow his Holy One to see corruption. When Peter said that David died, he's buried, his tomb is with us today, Peter declares to those that were listening to him that although David had prophesied of one that would be one that would die and his flesh would not see corruption and his soul would not stay in Hades, that it wasn't David of whom he was speaking, because he'd been dead 1,000 years. And if in the course of time his body had not decayed, that was something certainly unusual, for David's body had decayed. He had done just as his son had decreed. The Bible teaches that Solomon wrote in Ecclesiastes, the 12th chapter, these words, "Then shall the body return to the dust as it was, and the spirit shall return to God who gave it." So we look at David then, and David's body had decayed. 1,000 years had passed. His soul was still in Hades. So David was not speaking of himself, and that the apostle said when he said that his tomb is with us to this day. And therefore, being a prophet and knowing that God had sworn with an oath to him that of the fruit of his loins he would raise one up to sit upon his throne, he, foreseeing this, spake before of the resurrection of Christ, that neither was his soul left unto Hades, nor did his flesh see corruption. David therefore prophesies that Jesus, his son, would be one that would be in the tomb, but not long enough that his body would see decay. I think that it is wise that we think for just a few moments about this expression, "You will not leave my soul in Hades," or, as the King James Version puts it, "You will not leave my soul in hell." One of the best loved translations of the Scriptures has been through the ages and still continues to be the beloved King James Version. In this prophecy in Acts, the 2nd chapter, we find that David, speaking from Psalm 16, verses 8 through 10, that the translators of the King James Version said, "You will not leave my soul in hell." And because there are those that think only of one thought of hell, of what it means, that it means punishment, and it has to do with the matter of suffering. There are those that look at the statement, considering only the King James Version, and saying, when Jesus died, his suffering wasn't ended there. He was nailed to the cross, and he suffered physical death. But in 3 days, he was in the tomb, and he was also, his soul was in the fiery torrents of hell. He suffered 3 days. My friend, that's a false misconception. Jesus did not go to a place of torment. The King James Version uses the word hell to translate 3 different Greek words. One is the word Hades, which means the place of the departed spirits. And it is a term that embraces 2 areas, the place where the wicked go and the place where the righteous go. And the place where the wicked go is another Greek word, likewise translated hell, and that word Tartarus. When we look at Lazarus and the rich man in Luke, the 16th chapter, the Bible says that in hell the rich man lifted up his eyes, and he was in torments. He was in Hades, but he was in a place of Hades called torment. But we find that Lazarus was in another place. He was in Abraham's bosom. There is one final place and one final word that describes another place that the King James Version likewise translates hell, and that's the word Gehenna. It's the place of eternal punishment. Jesus did not go to a place of torment. He did go to Hades, the place of the unseen. But remember, when Jesus was dying on the cross, there were 2 thieves, one on the right, one on the left. And at first these mocked the Master and said, "If you're the Christ, save yourself and us." But then the one on the right was one that had a measure of thinking about himself and repented. And to his fellow partaker in the crimes, he said to the thief on the left, "Do you not fear God, seeing we're in the same condemnation? And we, justly, we're suffering the consequence of our deeds. But this man have done nothing amiss." And so he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come in your kingdom." And Jesus said, "Today shalt thou be with me in paradise." Where did Jesus go? Well, that's where the thief went. They both went to Hades, Their spirits were in a place in which that it's unseen, but they went to paradise, a place of rest. And then the Bible said that because of this, he was raised up, and Peter said, whereof we all are witnesses. In our next session, we'll be considering the matter of Peter's 3 proofs for the resurrection and the whole of his sermon. But we have an announcement that we want to make. We are going to begin this coming Wednesday regarding a new study that we're going to conduct. And this new study that we're going to conduct is going to be called Daniel, the prophet of the exile. And on Mondays and on Fridays, we'll continue our journeys through Acts. We hope that you'll share in all of these. Study in the Scriptures is never wasted. It is profitable. We thank you for having chosen to listen with us today as we've looked at David's prophecy concerning the kingdom and the Son of God.